Hi, I'm Mike Shea with slyflourish.com and twitter.com/slyflourish. And this is the DM's Deep Dive right here on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. This is a show in which we pick a particular topic of interest in the world of Dungeons and Dragons and find an expert for this topic and dive deep into it. And today I am here with David Christ from Baldman Games. David, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, as you said, my name's David Christ. I own and run Baldman Games. I'm the senior DM for Wizards of the Coast events. I run things such as Gen Con, Origins, we do PAXs. We just did the D&D Alive event in May out in California. So my job is gathering DMs, training DMs, and getting people rolling dice at tables.
Awesome. So a couple of quick questions before I dive into the deep questions. How many conventions do you run a year?
It depends. I've done as many as 6 or 7
Okay.
in a year. I have 3 core ones that I do every year, which is Winter Fantasy, Origins, and of course next week the granddaddy of all Gen Con.
Right.
And then I have smaller ones that swirl around, such as the D&D Live events, PAX Prime. We're looking at PAX Unplugged, PAX East, as needed. But the 3 core never change.
Right, right. And how many D&D games happen at these conventions?
So for an example, at a Gen Con, we will normally run about 75 to 100 to 8,000 people through a game of D&D in about 3.5 days.
So how many games?
So that would work out to, what is that?
8,000 people?
8,000 people. So we're talking 1,400 tables worth of games.
Wow. All right. And that's one event.
Yeah, and so that's just one event. We're often working on multiple events. At Gen Con, sometimes we'll have 100 tables playing at one time.
At one time. So how many DMs do you typically see at a convention? So if you got 100 tables, you got at least 100 DMs.
Well, exactly. So at Gen Con, I think this year we're at 192.
192 at Gen Con this year.
To make everything work.
Right.
We actually start at 8 a.m. in the morning and we finish at 1 a.m. at night each day. So we're doing basically 17 hours of D&D a day.
Right.
So it takes a big crew to keep that machine chugging along.
Right. So the reason I wanted to have you on the show, I was very excited. You and I had a conversation at Winter Fantasy earlier this year. I don't know if you remember, because you talked to a lot of people. But and I kind of hinted at some of the questions we're going to talk to today. But the reason why I think your experience is so interesting is because I'll make this statement. You can say no, actually, there's this other guy in Europe, but it seems like you touch more dungeon masters, figuratively speaking, than anybody in the world.
I would be hard pressed to think of somebody that's had more.
Yeah. So a bunch of us jackasses are on Twitter all the time talking about our opinions about what people should be doing when it comes to dungeon mastering. And then you're handling 400 dungeon masters a year. Right?
Gen Con will be my 52nd major show that I run next week. Through all those shows, I've probably had close to 2,500 different DMs work for me over almost the last 20 years.
So and beyond you walking around and kind of seeing how things are going and having people come up to the counter and talk to you, and having the DMs come and talk to you and you talking to them during your group meetings and stuff, you also survey all of the players that sit down at all of these tables.
Yep.
To kind of get a gauge of how things went. But when did that start? When did you start doing
I think we did our first test of that it was 2014 or 2015, I think, is we used to do it. We used to have this thing of, we want to identify the bad eggs as fast as possible.
Right.
Either help them, right? They just might need a little training, or they might just be a bad egg and we need to get rid of them.
Right.
But then we realized that we could also use it to reward the good people as well. And so I actually brought in some college professors and some school teachers who actually do this kind of metric testing and questions. And, we actually put a lot of work into the survey of how we word the questions, and it's exceeded my expectations.
Really? And then you're able to really use what you got from that to kind of turn that back around into making the whole program better.
Exactly. It helped, as much as I'd love to sit down at every table and see how every DM judges and kind of rank them on, hey, you're doing really good, you're doing really bad. It's just physically impossible,
Sure.
to do that. So, I always thought that this was going to help me identify the bad people fast. But what it turned out doing is it let me identify the good ones.
And
right?
that kind of led to the Herald's program, right?
Which led to the Herald's program. They were tied into, we wanted to have this system where, you went up in levels in a guild. Well, what do you need to go up a level? I need feedback. We wanted to get to a place where the guild members actually voted for themselves. Like you can only get to a certain level without being voted by your peers.
Right.
So how do we put together a system where your peers can actually recognize you for the good things that you're doing?
Right.
And, to date, we've collected almost 40,000 survey forms.
Wow.
So we've gotten a lot of really great data.
Man, do you have like a CSV, like an Excel spreadsheet you could send me? I would love to chew on 40,000 rows of D&D data.
So I'm actually my day job. I'm actually a database guy.
Yeah.
I build finance database systems. So of course it's all in a database and query.
Oh man, I want it so bad. You can anonymize it. You can pull all the people out, just give me the scores.
There's lots of good information in there.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
And then after every show, we actually send a report out to every individual DM telling them what the average was for the show, as well as where they fell on that scale.
Oh, that's got to hurt for some people.
It can, but some people take it really well of, hey, I really wasn't as prepared as I wanted to be.
Interesting.
And my numbers show it.
Yeah.
And they step up. Other ones stamp their feet and
right. So this is exactly what I want to get into in this show today, right? Because again, like we have a whole bunch of people that have a whole bunch of opinions, right? They're like DMs of one, and they have them and their 6 players, and then what they see on the internet, and then we have you with 40,000 surveys of DMs. So I want to start with my first real question of the show, which is, given all of what you have seen, all of the feedback you've received from these surveys, all of what you've experienced running, you said 50 big shows.
Yeah, 50
right, and thousands of God, what is that? Tens of thousands.
So Gen Con, Gen Con next week should put me over 150,000 people that we've run through a game.
So 150,000 people. So with all of that you have seen, what are the top 3 tips that you have based on what you have seen from all that experience?
So top 3. So the top 3 that I think would make a really good DM.
Yeah.
Is one of them, it's about the group, not you. And this goes back to some of the worst traits we see in DMs that really run into problems. D&D is a collaborative story, and as a DM, you have to realize that even though you're the DM, the players have almost as much control, or they should have almost as much control as you do as the DM. You have your dice and you're fudging things sometimes and unfudging things, all in serving the story.
Not an organized play though, right? You never cheat in organized play.
Well, never. But
never.
You know what? It's actually funny. That's one of the things. It's about the group, not you.
Right.
Realize that by bringing the group and making them part of the story, you're going to run a better table. Number 1 is have fun.
Right.
If the DM is having fun and smiling and laughing, then odds are the players are going to be as well. And when I have my pre-show meetings, the first thing I harp on isn't knowing all the rules. It's not knowing every quirk, every power combo, every cheese weasel move. Number 1 thing I tell every DM is have fun. If you're running if you're running a fun game, everything else takes care of itself. And if you do run into a hiccup, that hiccup goes a lot smoother when everybody's laughing about it than when everybody's stressed out about it.
Right.
And that kind of goes into the third one is nothing goes as planned, but disasters are fun. And when you're sitting at a table with 6 effectively random people that might, it can be intimidating when you sit down at a table and all 6 of the players act like they've known each other since 2nd grade.
Right.
And you're the outside, and you're the outside person.
Right.
But if you roll with the punches, things turn out better more often than not.
Uh-oh. I'm trying to save my notes. I'm writing frantically because this is such great stuff. And then I almost overwrote another file. So we're all good now. That's yeah. So there's the tips that you would give to a new DM. Those that's great. Like all of
Mhm.
the experience of what you've seen when you sit down with new DMs before a show, you give them these pieces of feedback so that when they go out there,
Yeah.
they're armed with this stuff. But there's also like the traits that you've seen of the highest scoring. I mean, I'm I don't want to harp on the scoring. Like obviously metrics are. I'm a big
Yeah.
data nerd too, right? But you also know them too. So and having that mixture, like data only works well when it's also going through the brains of people who understand what it means.
Yep.
So what would you say are the top traits of the best DMs you have run into?
I would say one of the first ones is preparation.
Mhm,
Um, we've all come into our home game or another game where we didn't quite get to prepare that week as well as we wish we could have,
mhm,
and it kind of shows.
mhm,
If you prepare your material well, if you read it, you reread it, you make a bunch of notes,
mhm,
you're much better able to deal with the random things that happen
mhm,
when you're not also worrying about what the next encounter is.
mhm,
When you know what, and that kind of ties into the second part of, a good DM prepares, a good DM is ready to improvise.
mhm,
In order to improvise, once again, if you don't prepare, it's really hard to improvise.
mhm,
And I think part of that comes into our brains and how we multitask.
mhm.
Everybody thinks they're awesome at multitasking, but as study after study has shown,
First of all, there is no such thing. There's only
exactly,
task switching, and we all suck at it.
exactly.
Right.
We're processing tasks in a row, but
Right.
the better you know the adventure,
Mhm.
the less brain power you're spending on trying to
Switching.
remember
Yeah.
what you're supposed to do instead of doing something fun.
Mhm.
Right. And, so those two really tie into each other a lot,
Yeah.
you know, and the last one is, smile. It's a
Mhm.
game, have fun.
Mhm.
It's the DMs
Is
that
that a trait you see in DMs? Those
it
who are
is. It's
yeah.
if you start stressing out,
Mhm.
it leaks through into the rest of the game, right? You could be totally a train wreck inside, right?
Mhm.
You could be a train wreck inside, but if you're smiling and having fun,
Mhm.
the game runs better.
Mhm.
Everybody's there to have fun. And
Right.
if you're, as a DM, if you're stressing out and you're flipping through papers and you're reading the next paragraph and everybody's staring at you, now you get more stressed out, they get
Mhm.
more stressed out, everything goes downhill.
Right.
The good DM knows to be like, hey, this is a great place for us to take a 10-minute break,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because he
Yeah.
needs a second to regroup, or maybe
Right.
somebody at the table's having a rough time and he needs to pull them off to the side. It's all that comes with preparing,
Mhm.
and goes from there.
So yeah, so the smile and keep your try to push the stress away and have fun. Sort of matches the one of the tips you gave for new DMs. So I'm going to ask you for a fourth. What is a fourth trait you have seen among the best DMs that you've worked with?
Best DMs that we've worked with. Fourth trait.
Putting you on the spot.
Put me on the spot. That's okay. I'm trying to think. There's so many things bouncing through my head. Um, part of me is like, oh, the guy that prepares really good miniatures, but I know just as many people that do theater of the mind, and it
Mhm,
works really well.
mhm.
Um, I'm pulling a blank. We might have to circle back
All
around.
right, we'll come back. Keep that in your
Keep it in my back of
multitask that one. Put that on one of the back processors, and we'll come back.
my yeah.
So I don't want to harp too much on quote unquote bad DMs,
Mm.
right? But the DMs that have received the harshest feedback, what are the common traits that you have seen there?
Um,
Mostly from the point of view of things we can avoid. I assume you could take these three and flip them around,
you
right?
can flip
Like,
them around a bit, but one of the biggest complaints we get, and one of the easiest way to get low ratings, is a DM who says, "I'm telling my story. You're just along for the ride."
mhm,
Right? And we've all had those games where you're like, "Yeah, the DM just told me to roll dice now and then. I don't think it really mattered, and we kind of got to the end, and I'm not sure how we got there, but hey, then we all went and got lunch." Right?
right.
It's the DM who's so certain that the way that they're running the game is the perfect way to run the game,
Mm-hmm.
that they just ignore all the feedback they're getting, right?
Yeah.
All the stimuli that's telling them that they're going down the wrong path. You know, it's the DM who thinks he's perfectly and always right
Yeah.
is usually the one that's going to get crappy ratings.
Are you familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this feels like, I don't know if it's exactly that, because I bet some of these people maybe have played a long time, but
Yeah, it is. And
yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you think you're really good and you're really not, and then when you don't think you're particularly good is when you're actually growing and getting better.
Exactly, you're growing and getting better. Some of our best DMs lately have been some of the newest people to the game.
Yeah.
And I think part of that's because they're not encumbered by all this baggage of previous editions and previous expectations.
Yeah.
And, you know, they get it. They're just there to have fun, and it shows.
Yeah.
But yeah, the DM, and it's funny because those DMs get their ratings and they almost self-select themselves out of the group, right? Because they get those ratings,
and then they're like, this isn't for me.
And well, they look at them and go, this is hogwash. This is junk. I know I'm a good DM. I'm a good, right? But it's that same thing. It's, you know, either confirmation bias or unconfirmation bias.
And then they leave the program.
And usually, yeah, because usually you have to be pretty bad for us to boot you out initially.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be. I mean, we've had ones where they haven't even made it through a show, and I've been like, you know what, we're done.
Oh, really? Wow.
To leave. Inappropriate humor at tables.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So you can. Yeah. The things that we just don't accept.
Yeah, right.
But so another one we get is, and it kind of ties into what makes a good DM. Like you said, it's the flip, not being prepared. Mm-hmm. You know, when you come to a convention, it's your vacation, right? You're taking time off, you're spending money, especially like a Gen Con, right? You're spending
flying out there,
to be at this show.
Right.
Sit down at a table, and the DM goes, "1 sec," and stares down behind us.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Your numbers are falling really, really quickly.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, you gotta be prepared.
Yeah.
You know, so everybody would be like, oh, whatever, Bob's gonna go grab a smoke, you catch up, I'm gonna get some tacos. Right? You gotta roll with it, right? At a game convention, I got a game in 3.5 hours, right? We need to get this show running because I have somewhere else I need to be, and I paid for a cool DDN game.
Yeah, right.
You know, not to stare at the top of your head.
Right. So you mentioned preparation both as a good and a bad, or both as a trait of somebody who you know, are definitely holding their own, and those who are not holding their own. What are the things that they are preparing? You mentioned like reading and taking notes. What else?
Some things I see that people do and things that help me as well. I said I've been playing since '82. You know, I've way too long when I actually think about it. You know, they write NPC names, right?
Okay.
You pronounce them ahead of time, you know, because as we know, reading a name and actually saying it out loud to a table is two different things.
Right.
They put monster stats on cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
They get initiative trackers and have them ready. Some DMs will pre-roll initiatives for their monsters, right? Mm-hmm. So they're just waiting for the players' numbers and they're just slotting them in.
Right.
You know, these are all things that give the players have confidence of, hey, this guy's got his shizzle together, right?
They already know it. Yeah, they know what they're doing.
Because
right.
See those type of things. You know, we have, you know, one of the things that we do to help our DMs is we actually have forums before the shows that group together all the DMs that are running the similar tracks of adventures.
So your slot
and we actually bring in the authors and the editors so that they can actually talk through these adventures from start to finish before the show ever starts. So they can be like, hey, I'm confused about this part. And another DM will step up and go, oh yeah, I was confused too. That's on page 5. Oh, cool. Right. It's those things of, by reading it and preparing it, they're finding the parts that are confusing them and going and finding the answers before they're actually sitting at the show where they can't do them anymore.
Besides the stuff you mentioned, is there any other sort of high impact bit of preparation, particularly something that a home DM could also do? That seemed to makes a big difference.
You know, I swear people get a slight point bump with their ratings when they use candy as monsters. Timeless classic. You know, it might be, you know,
I love this game.
Starburst.
I'm jacked up on sugar.
You know, Starburst will get you a little bit, but you know, if you throw out some mini Reese's peanut butter cups as monsters, you'll find that.
So in your experience and your, you know, in your view, which is better, having the exact right miniature to represent every monster or having it represented by a Reese's peanut butter cup?
I would probably say Reese's peanut butter cup,
Really?
right?
'Cause that's significantly cheaper.
It is significantly cheaper. Exactly, especially when you're running higher level events that use
Like with all your, then you got to put like a
I need
full
to
size
make
Reese's
it
peanut
dragon.
butter cup because it's got to stand
They
up
do
for a
make those giant-
gargantuan.
Exactly, they didn't make those big peanut butter cups.
You're fighting Orcus. I brought this pie.
You know, but it's funny because there's the flip side that to the person who has the terrain and the minis can make a really awesome experience, right? But I've seen the flip side of that where the person with the awesome minis and terrain is so focused on the awesome mini and the terrains.
They forget the 5 other people sitting around the
that they
table.
forget all the other stuff.
Yeah,
right.
It's interesting. Yeah,
It
I was
looks
wondering. I had that conversation on Twitter too about like, if you are a player walking in and you had a choice of what table you're going to, and you see like one person who's got nothing and one person's got like a, $500 Dwarven Forge setup. Who do you choose? And people said like, well, I don't know, that Dwarven Forge setup looks pretty great. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if that means it's going to be any good at all.
exactly the guy with the
no
guy with the empty table doing theater of the mind,
right? Might have a really great game,
right?
Yeah.
So it's you're right. It's fancy window dressing,
right?
But it might be bait and switch, and you
right.
might not. You're not.
Right. It doesn't necessarily, if they're not doing the other things, right? If they're not prepared with the adventure, if they're not thinking about the group and the fact that the group is bringing the story to the table, if they're not having fun and smiling.
Yeah. But most of the time, if somebody spent the effort to actually get the miniatures and everything together, that goes back to the prepared part. And they'll usually run a pretty good game.
Yeah, they right. Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have any tips for so you've had to deal with new DMs now, as though they're a pain in the ass. You've worked with new DMs a lot over the years.
A ton. We have
like every
almost 50 of them at Gen Con are new DMs that I've never used before.
Yeah. So when you, besides is there any advice you give to them that's different from the advice you've been giving so far?
So one of the great things with the Herald's Guild, is we have a colored shirt system.
Right.
And I actually based the colored shirt system off the old Basic Expert Companion Masters.
Really?
Exactly. So it goes red, blue, a green, black. So it's actually based off the old box sets from the 80s.
Wow.
The Frank Menser or sets. And it's great though because the new DMs are reds. So we make fun of them as red shirts, right? It's like, no, we're not going to kill you, but we're going to make you go get coffee.
Right.
But we always say, when we have a really high retention rate with our DMs because it becomes part of a family. It's like a fraternity, right? You kind of earn your stripes, by running at a big convention like a Gen Con. And we do a lot of mentoring, right? And it's where we assign our higher level DMs to the lower DMs because that new player may feel a bit intimidated coming and chatting with me at HQ or chatting with somebody at HQ because they're like, oh, I don't want to ask this question. It's going to make me, I'm going to be dumb, right? They're going to be like, oh, how can you not know the answer to that question? But they don't feel that same with their fellow DM, right? So they'll walk up to that person with the blue shirt and be like, hey, I have this question. Would you help me out? Right. And so we kind of, that's one of the big things we do with our new DMs. It's like, hey, when you go to run this event and all the DMs are gathering up beforehand, there's going to be red shirts, blue shirts, green shirts. If you have any questions, and it could just be simple as, hey, what's the checkout time at the hotel? And, they're going to step up and help you. And we found that by eliminating as many of those worries that are in their heads before the convention happens or early on, lets them focus on running a game, and then they relax, and then it takes care of itself.
Is there a way to kind of transfer that idea to home DMs? If there's a brand new home DM, is there is mentorship, finding the other more, experienced DMs who have been around the road and finding the right ones?
That's the that's the key. It's finding the right ones because as we all know, there's plenty of DMs out there who are more than willing to give you their
and
opinion.
The stronger their opinion, the more they fall into that category of people who know everything and don't need any help, right?
They know everything and don't need any help. We've actually done, I think we have 4 of them up right now. We actually have 4 seminars up aimed at new seminars, webinars. I know there are videos that we did of seminars at Gen Con, that we recorded that are actually aimed at new DMs getting into judging. They are a little more aimed at the convention, because at the convention you're going to get 6 random people.
Right.
Game, you're usually not going to get 6.
And your clock is super tight. And,
random people.
Yeah.
So mentoring would be really great, but I don't know. We're all very stubborn in our own little way, and I get it myself as well. I have the way that I DM, and I think it works perfect.
Right.
But at the same time, I know that's not true.
Yeah.
Right. I know
we do have that advantage now of because the internet and as the guy with 40,000 player surveys, we have a little bit more statistical significance when we can go hit up 50 DMs and kind of see where do people generally lie with this?
Yeah. Where do people normally go wrong?
Where do people go wrong, or where do they go right, or what are some ways I can handle this? I think the internet's done many terrible things, but it's also done many, many good things. And one of them is the ability to ask a question and get 50 DMs to kind of answer it. I think is
exactly. When we were younger and we had a question at the bar, we just argued. Right. There was no way to know the answer.
Yeah. Memorizing baseball stats was important.
Exactly. Yeah. Now all those arguments last 30 seconds until somebody pulls their phone out. So there's good and there's bad.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So obviously there's some big differences between organized play games and running, doing well running an organized play game and running home games. And I don't want to conflate the two too much, right? That being good at one means you're good at the other, or being bad at one means you're bad at the other. What would you see as sort of the big differences there?
So one of the big differences that I think you'd see between an organized play and a home game is in a home game, the story conforms to the characters. In a convention game, it is the reverse. At the convention, you're sitting down to play a game. Baron Bob of the Burger Barn wants, to hire you to go do something.
It doesn't matter who you are.
Doesn't matter who you are. Your choice is, right? I either have to help
or I go to another table.
Burger,
right.
Or dang it, I'm in the coffee line. Right? Getting coffee for the rest of the table.
Right.
In a home game, that doesn't work that way. Right. In the home game, if the king comes up and asks you to help him, you could all sneak away and go, you know what? We're just going to rob this guy and we're going to head one team over.
Right.
And you can do that, which is great in a home game, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work in a convention game. Now, a really good convention DM would be like, okay, cool, you can do that.
Right.
He would railroad you right back to the plot.
You figure out how to
never realizing it, right?
Right.
And that I guess that goes back. What's a really good trait of a good DM? The ability to railroad the party without them ever knowing it's actually happening. It's we've all done it. And when you do it perfectly, you chuckle to yourself and don't let anybody know that you've done it.
Right.
But that's one of the big differences. In a home game, side quests and side treks are a feature.
Right.
Convention, they're a bug.
Right.
You can't chat with the barmaid for an hour and a half at the convention game. Not if you actually want to get to the end of the story.
Right.
That, and I think the home game advantage is just much better food. Food sucks. It's the $8 plastic burger and the $4 soda. The guy that brings the pizza and the soda at the home game, it's just much superior to the convention.
Right. So. Yeah, and there's something that I think it's absolutely fascinating. Kind of, I mean, all I do is think about D&D all the time, right? And there's one of the absolute fascinating ideas of this is that we have this huge community now. It's so much bigger than I've seen it, right? And I'll have these conversations with hundreds of people a week, sometimes a day, talking about this topic. But the reality is, then we all go to our home with our 5 friends in our living room, totally isolated from the rest of the world, and we run our own games. And when you look at the DMs who may have scored low as a convention DM, they might have this, or the ones that say like, I'm really good and you're, everyone else is a jerk. They as far as them and their 5 friends are concerned, they may be right? Like it might not matter, because it doesn't matter to the rest of the world what happens at that table.
Yeah, I had that happen. That exact thing about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
A couple of my friends who are in the industry were recommending a guy that ran the home game in their local town.
Hmm.
And these are, I mean, if I said these names, everybody would know who they are. And they're like, this guy runs the most awesome game in the world.
Hmm.
And so I started to do some work with him, and it fell apart quickly
Hmm.
because he couldn't work within the framework of organized play,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? He was the
So off the
greatest,
wall.
right? He was
Yeah.
the greatest home game person ever. But
Hmm.
when you started putting this structure of, hey, these things need to run within a
Yeah. Right.
4 hour block,
Right.
you can't kill Tiamat at the first level adventure or or whatever it might be, and it was that exact thing of, I'm still friends with him. He's an awesome
Hmm.
guy and he does run a great game, but he's not an organized play DM
Hmm.
because he has his story and he weaves it magically,
Right.
but it doesn't work at a convention.
Right. Right. So let's talk a little bit more about this explosive growth of D&D that we are seeing. Is that, first of all, like I'm seeing it in the news, and I'm certainly, I keep track of how many tweets are using the D&D hashtag month to month, and I can see this clear trend. And are you seeing that same kind of growth over the past 5 years or so?
We are, like I said, I've played since, basic,
Mhm.
advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it's
Mhm.
advanced. That's exciting. We've gone through the ebbs and flows, so we went through the third edition boom in
Mhm.
2000.
Mhm.
Um, but this one seems bigger, right?
Really?
It's um, one of the biggest things I've seen is the average age of the person sitting at the table has been going down,
Mhm.
and that's just shown up. I know Wizards has done some studies on it as well, but the average age of the gamer is decreasing,
Right.
which is great because for the previous 15 years,
Yeah, it's like, oh,
as
this
I got
this hobby's
older,
dying with us.
it's like it was in
Yeah.
my side pocket, and as I went
Right.
merry along, I dragged it with me,
Yeah.
and it's now behind me. It's behind me by like 15 years, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Um, my daughter comes home and talks about the D&D club and how it became much cooler because a couple football players decided to join it last year. When I was in high school, that never would have happened. I
Mhm.
mean, the only football player that played D&D was me, and when I got picked on for it.
Yeah.
Um, so it's great seeing the age dropping.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Um,
was like for a long time, especially I think in the late third and in the fourth edition age era, looking around, we were like, we're afraid this hobby's going to die with us.
yes,
Right. That like, everyone else is going to move to video games and everything else. And
I think
there's
it did
not going to
happen
be,
for a bit, right? It
and I
was
think it
that,
did. Yeah. But I don't think it,
it stole that generation,
right.
but that generation's come back.
Yeah, I think we thought it was dying because of the medium.
Mhm.
Right? That we just thought like a bunch of people sitting around a table rolling dice, regardless of what the rule set is, and regardless of
Yep.
anything else. And then I think it turned out that, there's, you know, yeah, I mean,
I
I
think
can't
board
explain it,
games
but
really
here we
helped.
are. Yeah.
I think board games in a lot of ways were that bridge between the video game playing
Hmm.
and coming back to the tabletop playing
Hmm.
because they realized, hey, wait a minute, I can still sit around the table and make fun of all my friends, right? Just like
Right.
I'm doing in the video game,
Yeah.
except we're actually all sitting around the table together as
Yeah.
opposed to having headsets
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I like to think of it as from like a computational standpoint of like imagine a game console that had more power than all of the computers in the world put together, all chained together, and with some of the best capability to compute all this stuff, and maybe an actual piece of software, a full artificial intelligence piece of software that could respond to you. And that's what you have when you have another human being on the other side of the table, right?
It's what we've always wanted as nerds since back in the
Right. It's like we had
right?
that. We've had it all along.
But we were trying to create it on a Commodore 64
Yeah,
with some
right. Well,
floppy
maybe
disks.
just talk to your buddy, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah, it's fascinating.
and it is, and it's funny because I think a lot of those people have realized that the video games that they're playing, these massive games,
Yeah,
are just D&D games,
right.
right? When they're playing Halo
Yeah,
or Destiny 2,
yeah,
it's just a D&D game,
yeah.
right?
Although
It
usually
all
not
came.
not quite as good and as flexible.
You're right. You're right. It isn't, and I think that's what brings them to the D&D eventually is they
Right.
realize that they're playing this story, but sometimes those rails are really big and obvious, right? Look, it's the giant wall that I can't climb over no matter how much I try.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in D&D. So they realize, hey, wait, I can still get this awesome, cool story, but I can literally do anything.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine, a longtime childhood friend of mine, and his family were visiting, including his son, who's I think 14 or 15, right at that perfect age. And his son played Skyrim like crazy and talked about it, but I was talking about D&D, and he's like, "Oh yeah, D&D is great." And he's like trying to explain it to his mom. I was like, "This is like you could do anything. You can take a crap wherever you want." And his mom's like, "Josh."
Exactly. What are you teaching my kid?
It's like, why was that? Why that was the limitation? Like that's what you wanted in a game? But, it's such a 15-year-old response. Um,
It's funny.
so so now that you're seeing this new influx of people, and particularly you're seeing much younger people coming to the table, are you seeing changes in their expectation in what they want from the game than they did 5 years ago, or even further back?
Um, so the newer generation, so say let's go back 10, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
And I said, cool, I'm going to run this epic game at Gen Con, and it's going to be 12 hours long. We're going to have candles on the table, bring extra Mountain Dew. There would have been a line of people lined up, right? They would have been, that's awesome.
Right.
The new group coming in would be like, nah, I'm good.
Hmm.
They want to play 2 to 4 hours.
Interesting.
Um, and they want to sit down and play D&D, but they're like, okay, cool. And they want to go do something else.
Mm-hmm.
We've put a lot more 2-hour games into our schedules. And every year I have to keep upping the number of people that I have running them. It's, they love playing D&D, but for them, it's almost like not a board game, but it's that mentality of I'm going to sit down and play D&D for 2 to 4 hours, and then I'm done and I'm going to move on.
Yeah, interesting.
Or they set one day aside and say, hey, this is my D&D day.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go do something different. When it used to be on a Thursday, I'd see the crowd roll in,
mm-hmm.
and I could probably count 95% of them would be there the next morning, the next morning, the next morning, right?
Yeah.
And there still is that group, but that group's shrinking, and which is great for the hobby because they're going and playing other things, right? Which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But they're looking for shorter arcs. The other thing is, a home game, we always think about this epic level home game, right? We're going to play for 5 or 10 years, or that's some guy on the internet I saw who has his home game that's been going for like 24 years.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
The new players don't seem to want that, which I think we see with how Wizards is putting out their content now. They put out their new storyline, right? We're all going to Avernus, and it's going to be awesome and it's going to be fun.
Right.
They play that for 9 months and go, okay, cool, I'm done. Right. And they make a new character, or they take a break and they come back. They see D&D as, I'm going to play this game and it's going to have a conclusion, and that conclusion is going to happen sometime in the next 4 to 7 months. And then cool, I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is a different mindset, or at least for me, right? My home games last years, right? Before we ever get to a conclusion.
Right.
So it's a bit different.
Interesting. Is there any change in how much attention they want, or how much of a focus of the game they want on things like combat versus role playing, or story versus kind of tactics? Anything that you see in that regard?
I think the newer groups coming in like the story, right? Everybody likes rolling dice. But the new generations, as they come in, especially with finally we're seeing a lot more women around the table. We're seeing a lot more just diversity around the table, which is great, and it's awesome. It's not as much about that tabletop war game mentality as much as it is about the story. We're actually running an event for the first time at Gen Con that is actually going to have no DMs. It's going to be a full D&D LARP, basically for the first time. And I don't think I could have really pulled it off 10 years ago without really pulling people's fingers and thumbs to make it happen. This time, people are coming out of the woodwork, wanting to help with it, wanting to play it. They're just excited about. It's all about the story.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting you talked about the time, because the best D&D experience I've ever had in my life was at, I think it was Origins last year, with the Dragon Heist.
The open?
Yeah, the open. And I think it was 10 hours.
Yep, it was 10 hours. Yeah, it was 10 hours. We had a break in the middle.
Yeah.
But you're right. There was there wasn't a lot of combat in dice.
We had one fight against one guy in one room, and we screwed up. That was the only reason we fought the guy. And I was on the edge of my seat the whole game. Right. It kind of really, this sort of got me thinking a lot about all the things we're talking about today, because in that case, I had a DM who had, I think, only been DMing, I think, less than a year. And she's definitely one of the best DMs I ever played with. She was wonderful. And our group was great. It helped that we all kind of knew each other.
Yeah.
And that meant that the players could be silly. So, like, you know, they had the fan, right? When the whole thing was,
we had the fan
and he was doing this fan dance around the table, you know, and it was just hysterical. And so it showed me, like, what a game. First of all, it showed me how heists work and work well in D&D, but it also showed me just how, you know, that, and how the number of years a DM has been running D&D doesn't necessarily equate to how much fun they bring to the table.
Exactly.
And also about how you can have a 10-hour long D&D game with one fight against one character and everyone still loves it.
Exactly. And everybody loved the event. You know, it was a great event. I think you're right. It proved that you give people a cool enough story and then give them agency.
Yeah. And that had a lot of agency in that adventure. Like,
then they have fun, because players could come up with anything they wanted to do. You know, they could come up with the craziest plan in the world, and you'd be like, all right, let's try it. Right. And you know, and it was a really, really good event.
Yeah. So we want to take some questions that we have received on Twitter, and also probably folks on Twitch. As always, our guardian angel, Rudy Basso, has been monitoring all of that and listening to our conversation. Rudy, what questions do you have?
Hello. Hi. How are you? Here's some questions. First question. What are some of the adventures that have gotten the best feedback from players? And
you're not allowed to mention the open, because we just talked about that one.
We won't mention the open. Of course, you know, we're partial to some of our own Moon Shea Isles stuff that we've been doing. You know, we've been kind of given our own little bit of a sandbox to play in. But we have Moon 2-2. I forget the name. So Dave is horrible with names, so I will apologize for that in advance.
You know, Eric Mengi is a lunchtime buddy of mine.
What's that?
Eric Mengi.
Oh, yes.
He and I get lunch every couple of weeks.
When we figured out what area we were going to get in the Moon Shays, you know, what we were going to do, as soon as I knew we were doing stuff in the Moon Shays, he was the first person I thought of. And I thought he was going to chop my arm off in saying yes quickly, because it is just so an Eric Mengi. It's Army of the Unseen.
Army of the Unseen.
Moon 2-2. And it's a scary adventure, right? But it works really, really well about building tension and drama and really freaking the players out.
Is this the abandoned village with the ghosts? Yeah, I remember that. I played that one.
Yep. And so that one's happened. That one's gone over really well. That's a hard question to answer, just because by running so many shows, I see so many adventures that they all just start blurring together.
Are there types of adventures or sort of traits of adventures that you see tend to be more popular than others? Like we've been talking about DMs all this time. And
I know. We found, and so it's a format we use. We find players really like trilogies. You know, one adventure kind of wets your whistle.
Right.
You know, 2 or 3 days is a bit too much. So we write all of our stuff in trilogies. You know, so people kind of have that introduction, the middle, and they get the big fun conclusion at the end. But you have to give the DM the tools. You know, some DMs are really good at improvising. And if there's there's the 3 big pillars. You know, if the adventure's kind of missing one of the pillars, a really good DM can improvise that pillar. And the players don't even realize that the pillar's missing.
That's cool.
But a good adventure really gives the DM all 3 sets of tools to really deal with that random table that they're going to have sit down with them. Because you're right. You're going to have the table that just wants to role play and never roll a dice. And you're going to have the other table that's just looking for the next time for you to play.
Or worse, you have half a table that wants to do it without rolling any dice, and half a table that wants to, you know, do
those are the tough tables.
Moscow,
the tough tables. But but it's fun because if you a good DM is going to mesh those 2 halves of the table and make them realize at the end that they have a lot more in common than they don't have in You know, they might use different sets of tools to deal with the problems that are presented, but at the same time, you know, they're both getting to the same end.
Right. Rudy, what else you got?
So you touched. Oh, that last question was from Blake Ryan, by the way, in Twitch chat. We have another one from David Chrisman. You touched on new DMs. How many new players do you see at tables these days? If you had to like gauge, maybe percentage wise.
That's a good one. It really depends on the show. Like a show like a Winter Fantasy or an Origins are what we really call the really established shows. You know, they're so a lot of the players they've been playing for a while, and by a while I mean 2, 3, 5 years plus. So at those shows, the new players usually, when they drag a buddy that they used to play in high school with, they kind of drag them to the show. That's where we see that new player. At shows like PAX, the percentage of new players sitting down can sometimes be 50 to 70% or greater. Right? Players, they have no characters. A lot of times they just bought their set of dice in the hall before they came over to play, you know, and they're just clutching the dice in their hand and they're just ready to go. But there's definitely been an increase, you know, along with, you know, the average age of the player decreasing. You know, by default, it means the first time players showing up are increasing. Our introduction, like I said, our introduction to D&D events at Gen Con, we'll probably run between 1,000 and 1,500 people through one of those games, which is insane. I won't run that many through a game of intro at every other show put together.
Wow. Rudy, what else you got?
So, Baldman does run other games besides Dungeons and Dragons, correct? Have you seen a rise in popularity of these other RPGs as well, with the sudden growth that Dungeons and Dragons has seen?
It has. So, you know, at our shows, we run Shadow of the Demon Lord. At Gen Con, we're running Esper Genesis, which is, you know, 5th edition in space. Rich does a great job. What else are we running? We're running Arcanus, which is Paradigm, and Henry. And it used to be those games where, oh, there's one more. Oh, we're running Alternity, you know, from Sasquatch Games. You know, those guys, I've known them from way back in the 3rd edition D&D days. It used to be those games were filled by leftover D&D players, right? So it was, hey, we sat every possible D&D table we can. We still have these 30 people. Hey, we can't get you into a D&D game. Would you like to play some Alternity? Would you like, right? And so the tables went off, but they went off kind of because we had overflow, right? And it kind of spilled off into those events. Now those events are actually selling out on their own, right? Which is great. You know, and so that didn't happen in the past. So they are gaining popularity, but D&D is still the king of the castle, right? At the end of the day,
it's also it's your one chance to actually get to play a game like Shadow of the Demon Lord with Rob Schwab and get the quote unquote full Schwab experience.
The full Schwab experience does take parental consent.
I've had that. I have to say, I've had the full Schwab experience, I think 3 times now.
Yes, Rob comes out, he comes out to Winter Fantasy with us every year, and yeah, he runs his games, and they're a lot of fun.
I would love to see his feedback slips if you have those.
Oh, for Rob.
Are they just mad scrawlings of twisted runes and symbols that should never have existed?
You know, everybody just circles 5s, right? Because just does perfect. You know, on the back it'll say red rum, or it'll say,
yeah.
You know, bring me an old priest and a young priest. And
yeah. Excellent. I have one more question for you that I wanted to ask, and it's a smaller question, but it's one that we kind of touched on in earlier stuff too, particularly when talking about preparation. And I know that it's one of the questions that you ask on your player your feedback form. How important is rules knowledge compared to the other aspects of DMing?
Yeah. So there's 4 questions that we ask on our survey. They're rules knowledge, fun, you know, which we've touched on a few different times, friendly, and prepared. Out of those 4, knowledge is actually what I would consider the least of the 4.
Interesting.
So for example, prepared is the number 1 item. If your prepared number is low, So we have numbers 1 to 5.
Right.
5 being awesome. So a perfect score would be 20.
Right.
And to put this out there, we have DMs that have been DMing for me for probably 10 to 14 years,
Mhm.
whose ratings out of 20 are like 19.97,
Wow.
19.98.
Yeah.
We have some really great guys. But if your prepared number is low, all the rest of your numbers are going to be crap.
Really? It's like
it's a pattern.
You can draw that correlation.
Now say your knowledge number's low.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect the rest of them.
Yeah.
So, and you'll get those comments of, hey, Bob ran a really fun game. He seemed to really know what he was doing, but we had to pause a few times because he had to look a few things up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so he'll be 5, 4, 5, 3,
mm-hmm.
right? Not a horrible score, but that 3 will be in knowledge. Players are very, very forgiving
mm-hmm.
of you having to look up a rule
mm-hmm.
because they realize there's a lot of books and there's a lot of rules, they're very forgiving of knowledge, of your rules knowledge. They are very unforgiving of you not being prepared.
Interesting. Is there any, fun and friendly feel pretty tied together. Do you regularly see where they have one but not the other?
Not too much, because you're right, they do tie. I mean, we're trying to do two things.
This guy was really fun, but what an asshole.
It's right. It's hard to be an asshole and run a fun game.
Right. Well, we were talking about Rob Schwab before.
Exactly.
There are some examples out there.
Exactly. I know some people that could pull it off and get a 1 and a 5. But they are kind of tied together. But friendly edges out fun a bit.
Really? So it's better to be friendly?
If you're prepared and you're friendly, because if you're friendly and you're prepared and you're friendly and you screw something up and you're like, oh man, I just totally boned that. Can we go back and fix that? The players laugh with you,
right?
And you move on, right? But if you're not friendly I just screwed that up. Sucks to be you guys. And you just keep going, totally different experience for the players.
If we look at like what a 1 and a 5 looks like on that score, what does a 1 look like? Is that adversarial?
It's usually 1s come with, we have a space where people can type in comments.
Yeah.
5s and 4s, if somebody types a comment, it's usually like, great DM, awesome job, right? It's usually something simple. Mm-hmm. When you get 1s, there's usually a thesis on the back of it.
I've written some of those theses.
I've had one where people have written on paper and stapled it to the they really want me to know why they really
I guess is that good though? Like that should give you, it feels like that would give you more context as a guy who has written essays like that before.
Exactly.
I would hope that it's better than what an a-hole. Right? Which doesn't tell you exactly what happened.
Constructive feedback is better than just
I don't know that mine was always constructive.
Scratched on the back of a piece of paper.
Sean Merwin's door killed my character.
His door?
Yeah, he killed me with a door.
Nice.
Yeah. It's okay. I cornered him at a bar and we chatted about it for like an hour.
Nice.
Well, yeah. I call it a chat. I don't know that he'd refer to it that way.
It might have been a chat. It might have been a Inquisition.
He did win the Lifetime Achievement Award for Baldman Games, though.
Yes, he did. So
you just show that to me. It's like, well, whatever you think, I won the Lifetime Achievement Award.
Exactly. I owe Sean probably more dinners and beers than I could ever.
He's a fantastic member of our community.
So Sean and I've known each other for probably almost 20 years at this point. So
so that's really interesting. So and I kind of led that question a little bit, right? Because we hear it a lot as a a common advice that kind of gets thrown around on various social media platforms and stuff. When new DMs say like, what do I need? Or I'm worried that I don't know the rules real well. Almost everybody says, don't worry about it. Like that's the rules knowledge, fall back on your players. They'll help you. And I actually think there's I don't have anything to back this up, but it feels like there's almost an advantage in help, counting on your players to help you with the rules, because it breaks past that adversarial.
Yep. We're telling
adversarial relationship. Right.
It's not me versus you.
Exactly. We're all here.
I love my dear friend Chris Perkins to pieces,
Mhm.
but anybody that's watched an Acquisitions Inc. game
He's
knows that
100% on the rules.
no, Chris flies loose and fast,
Like,
right?
what kind of crit rule is that? Like,
What in the world was that? But Chris focuses on the fun,
right,
right? And nobody cares,
right.
right? Which is how it should be. It's like, I tell DMs all the time, when you get to a situation and you're not sure which way to go, you're not sure the rule, always pick the fun option,
Right.
right? That's it. Yeah, and it could be that the fun option is that the guy falls off the roof into the pig pen, right? That could be the fun option of the rule. Just own it, right? Own it, run it, and things will work out.
Yeah. Rudy, do we have any other any more questions? All right.
I can only imagine what some of the questions are.
No,
So there was a question
critical.
more about Shea and how
You're
it's
not going
kind
to
of
answer that.
changed.
You're not going to ask the Vorpal sword versus.
I'm
knife?
not gonna. I think candy is the better option if you're gonna give your players
Right.
actual items
Right.
at the table. I don't think
Instead
a knife.
of a knife.
Yeah.
That's my friend Mike. He likes to troll me into things. Says knife. Yeah. I'm sorry. What were you saying? Somebody said something.
Yes. So Mike Amer asked about the Shea storyline and how it has changed things at Baldman Game. But
Yeah.
you did kind of touch on that a little bit, David.
No,
If you wanted to go into a little
there's
bit
probably
detail.
more. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, in particular, you guys put out, you commissioned and wrote a whole campaign guide for that.
We did, and it's actually printed. Like I have a physical copy,
I do
which
too.
was really
I got one from one of the authors.
nice. It's just really weird looking back at nerdy 11-year-old me playing D&D of holy crap, I have a printed book. Like
Yeah.
it looks like a real book.
Yeah.
And it's like, so that part's pretty cool. Yeah, I can't be happier with how that book turned out.
Yeah.
It came out amazing.
Yeah.
The whole Shea project, as of Gen Con, we will have put out 37 adventures in basically 14 months.
Wow. Is it all tiers? It goes all the way from 1 to 20?
No, actually, our first tier 3 rolls out here at Gen Con.
Oh, okay. So all those adventures are tier 1 and 2.
Yeah, so we actually built. So if you use slow progression,
Mhm.
you can actually play through the entire story from start to finish with one character.
Wow.
And that's the way we wanted to build it. We're like, we're not going to rush to tier 3. We're going to tell our story, and when our story gets to that point, we get to that point.
Is there an overall story that's sitting on top of the trilogies?
Yes, so each trilogy has its own story, but there is actually an overarching story that will go from beginning to completion, just like any hardback novel.
Is it known?
It's starting to become known.
This is like your secret.
It's starting to become known. It'll become a lot more known at Gen Con.
Oh, cool.
I don't want to spoil too many things,
Mm-hmm.
but our big LARP event is actually centered around this new threat that will become more visible.
Mm-hmm.
And the players will actually be interacting with all the heads of the Shea factions, the
Mm-hmm.
power groups, and trying to convince the factions on what plan they should put into place to deal with this new threat.
Wow.
So the players are going to actually get to control how they're going to deal with this threat.
Cool.
Are they going to try to destroy it? Are they going to try to coerce it back to the light?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to try to ally with another city to bring them in to help deal with this threat? So the players get a lot of agency in how this is the big turning point. And so a lot of our winter fantasy adventures, while they're storyboarded out, they're kind of in this holding pattern, waiting to see what the players decide to do at Gen Con.
Oh, wow. That's great. So you're really taking the feedback, not just the feedback from the players, but like what, how they steer the course of the story.
Yep.
And letting that drive where the rest of the adventures go.
Exactly. So after Gen Con, the results of this big conclave will become public, and we'll post out, this is what the heroes of the Shays have decided to do. And then the players will see the results of that at Winter Fantasy.
That's great. David, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I appreciate you coming on the show. It's, like I said, you can't have a conversation like this anywhere, right? Like the amount of experience that you have with the number of DMs that you've seen, I think really brings a weight to the feedback that you don't get from, some numbskull who runs 2 games saying like, I know everything there's to know about DMing, right? So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. And I hope you'll come back again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me. I'd love to come back.
Best of luck at Gen Con. That'd be great. And I'm sure.
Are you going?
I am not going. It's always dependent on whether I can get a close room, which is now like a 1 in 10 shot. So
it is. Thankfully, I don't have to play the lottery game.
Yeah, I have to play
my own block of rooms, but
right.
That would make it rough.
Yeah. Where can people find you, and what do you want to pitch?
What do I want to pitch? DM's Guild, Moonshay Isles. That's our biggest thing. The great thing with the adventures, it goes to the authors. I don't take any of it. Everything that we have, I firmly believe, and when people do awesome stuff, they should be rewarded for awesome stuff. So go get the Moonshay Regional Guide. We've almost hit platinum.
Yeah.
We came out. I think it came out 10 months ago, and we're still on the top 10 list.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
So we're pretty happy with that. If not, just find one of our shows. You can find me at Baldman Games on Twitter, Baldman Games on Facebook, and all the other socially things that my kids tell me I should be much cooler on, but I'm not.
Yeah.
And baldmangames.com for our website. We're always looking for new DMs, and come out and play some games.
Awesome. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And Rudy, as always, thank you for managing the show. I couldn't do it without you.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who came in and chatted with us on Twitch tonight. And for all of you watching on YouTube, thank you. And for all of you fine folks listening to the podcast, thanks to you as well. And we will call it a night.